Hello, my name is Clive Corcoran and welcome to my YouTube channel, the Corcoran Codex. What I'm going to cover in this video, and I'm going to essentially share with you content that I've developed over a number of years for training, and I provide financial education to people in the banking and financial world, among the very many clients that I have worked with over the years, and where similar material to what I'm about to present has been shown and delivered are the Bank of England in the United Kingdom, Goldman Sachs, the ECB, HSBC Bank, and many other of the world's well-known global financial institutions. So we're going to look at using FX forwards and swaps. And the presentation is designed for educational purposes, but can also be used for example, actual practice if one has a need to hedge some kind of a foreign exchange position. So let's begin by talking about the rationale or reason for an FX forward. Assume a UK importer is planning to make a large purchase from a supplier in 1 year's time, and the amount due will be in US dollars. The supplier might be a US-based company, but equally could be anywhere in the world and simply is invoicing in US dollars. The UK importer is concerned that the pound sterling will depreciate against the US dollar during the coming months, and believes that the pound US dollar exchange rate is currently near the top of the expected range for the FX pair during the coming year. I mean, the importer might be wrong, but that's the belief at the time, and wants to lock in an exchange rate for the transaction in 1 year's time, which is based close to the current spot value of GBP USD. If sterling depreciates, the importer's cost in pound terms will increase when the payment is made to the supplier in 1 year. But if the importer was to enter into an FX forward agreement, and that would typically be with, say, a bank, most forwards or FX forwards in this regard would be custom OTC contracts between a customer and, let's say, his or her bank. The importer can then lock in an exchange rate now, today, which would then apply in 1 year's time when the currency needs to be paid. The forward rate agreement, as I've said, is an OTC contract, and it can be tailored to the exact requirements of the importer. So the importer can set the exact amount that needs to be paid, the exact date on which the money is required, and so on. How would we go about calculating the forward rate? So when the customer, let's say, wants this forward and calls the bank will be able to quote a specific forward rate. In this case, it would be a 1 year GBP USD forward. So how would that rate have been calculated so that the bank can then quote it? Now, the first thing to notice is that it is entirely dependent on information which is known today. There is no forecasting, no crystal ball gazing as to what the rate might be in 1 year's time. It is entirely dependent on information which is available right now. The variables that are involved in the calculation would include the current spot rate between sterling and dollar, and the applicable interest rates for the period, 1 year, for each of the currencies. So it would actually involve 1 year US dollar SOFR, which is the secured overnight financing rate. This is a term version of what essentially is the repo rate in New York, and 1 year SONIA, which is for the sterling, which is the sterling overnight index average. Let me now walk through what the actual process or the calculation process involves. So we start, let's say, with a small amount of sterling, to keep the example simple, let's say £1,000, and let's supposing that that £1,000 can be deposited into a sterling interest-bearing account which has a 4% rate of interest, and I'm going to assume a very simple interest issue here, no compounding and so on, At the end of the 1 year period, this will now be worth £1,040. Let's suppose, though, on the other hand, that the £1,000 is converted at the current spot rate, which is, let's say, 1.2750 or 1.2750. So that would then result in $1,275. Let's now suppose that that could earn 3% in a US dollar interest-bearing account. Once again, the idea of no compounding of interest. At the end of the 1 year period, that would now be worth $1,313. And the forward rate is simply that divided by that, which turns out to be 1.2627. We can actually generalize that calculation, or the logic behind that, with the following. So this is what is known as the interest rate parity theorem. Incidentally, it is what is known as a no arbitrage condition. What that means is that if the rate was not the one that we calculated, it would be possible, by going through the process that I showed on the last screen, to exploit the discrepancy and make a risk-free profit. So the formula is over here. I'll come back to this in a moment. We can simplify that. So the forward rate is the spot rate multiplied by, in brackets, 1 plus RQ, which is the interest rate for the quote currency in the relevant period. So this is actually the dollar in our example. And you divide that by 1 plus RB, which is the interest rate for the relevant period, which is 1 year, in the base currency, which in this case is the pound sterling. And if we plug the appropriate values in, we can see that we have the spot multiplied by 1.03 over 1.04, which gives us the forward rate, the 1 year forward rate of 1.2627. And the way that that is typically quoted in the Forex market is that we would take that forward rate and subtract the current spot rate. And in this case, that would lead to this amount here, which is negative 123 forward points or forward pips. Now, what I've explained is a simple, intuitive way of understanding the way that the forward is calculated. In the market, in the Forex market itself, there would be a tendency to use continuous compounding rather than the simple interest approach that I showed. And this then involves the formula on the screen. You can see the forward is equal to the spot multiplied by E. This is the Euler constant E, and we put in brackets the the interest rate for the quote currency and subtract the interest rate for the base currency, raise it to the power whatever the term is. So if we were to do this, let's say in Excel, we could easily calculate this. We have the 1.2750, and we use the Excel function exp, and in brackets we have 1.03 minus 1.04, which equates to minus 0.01. We raise it to the power 1 because it's only 1 year. That doesn't actually make any difference, of course. And it results in a slightly different forward rate to the one we calculated before, which is now 1.2623, which is 4 pips different from the rate that I showed on the previous diagram. Forward points or spreads are the number of pips or points to be added to or subtracted from the current spot rate of a currency pair to determine the forward rate. The simple rule of thumb is if the quote currency has a higher interest rate than the base currency, the forward points will be at a premium. In other words, the forward points would be added to the spot rate. That is not the case with the example we have just been looking at. If the base rate currency, which is sterling, has a higher interest rate than the quote currency, the forward points are at a discount and would thereby be deducted from the spot rate. That's what the example we saw shows. And forward spreads or points are presented as two-way quotes with a bid and an ask, or an offer price. Okay, let's now turn our attention to an FX swap. There are different kinds of FX or currency swaps available in the foreign exchange market. I'm only going to consider here the simplest version, which is just called an FX swap. There are other swaps known as cross-currency basis swaps, and they are dealt with elsewhere. So let us go again through the diagram. At the start of the contract, company A here gives B down here euros in this amount X, and that's based on the spot rate at the time between the euro and the dollar. And B transfers to A X spot S, as it were, in US dollars, which again reflects the spot rate at the time. So it's a straightforward transfer on a spot rate basis between euros going this way, dollars going that way. At maturity, let's say it's 1 year, B now returns the same amount of euros that it received at the beginning, but A transfers to B not the same amount that was here, but the amount which would be payable based on the 1 year forward, let us say, that was in effect back here. So in a sense, an FX swap involves an embedded forward contract. And we've already discussed how those are calculated. Let's give a simple use case now for why one might want to use an FX swap. I should say at this point, by the way, that quite a lot of the activity in FX swaps in the market is really effectively speculation trading based on, say, different opinions about where euro US dollar will be in the future, let's say after 1 year. But there is an example which I can give of a use case. Let's say a UK company is long US dollars from sales to a US customer. The customer's just paid and the UK company has, let's say, a sizable amount of dollars. The company operates primarily in the UK and obviously uses sterling as its base currency. Let's also suppose that this company needs to pay one of its suppliers in US dollars in 30 days' time. Now, what are the scenarios? Well, the UK company could take the dollars it's just received from the sales back here and spot sell them and buy GBP to cover its immediate overhead and bills. And 1 month later, when they need to pay the supplier, they could go back into the market and spot buy dollars by selling GBP to pay the US supplier, let's say. But this exposes them to interim negative exchange rate risk. So perhaps a better idea would be to enter a 1 month swap where they sell US and buy GBP on spot, as we saw in the last diagram, and simultaneously buy US dollars and sell GBP on a 1 month forward arrangement, as just discussed on the previous slide. The company is locked in the known GBP USD rate while still being able to use GBP for immediate domestic transactions. What we can see now is the mechanics of an FX swap, and now I'm switching back to euros against dollar. Let's say a dealer buys and sells 10 million euros spot against a 12-month, which has been priced at negative 112 pips. That would have been the forward rate, let's say, at the beginning of the period. How does this actually look? Well, it can be seen. So the dealer buys 10 million euros, and let's supposing the spot rate at the time is 1.1550, and sells forward the 12-month euro 10 million at this rate, where we take into account what the adjustment is for the forward rate, based in this case on negative 112 pips. So that equates to that. So very simply, let's say the dealer has 11.55 million, buys 10 million euros going this way, and 12 months later, the euros at 10 million are sold back into dollars, but we now need to take into account that this is the 1 year forward rate based on that number of, in this case, negative 112 pips. One of the consequences of using forwards is that you do commit to a specific exchange rate in the future, let's say after 1 year. The reason, obviously, for engaging in forwards is to protect a rate or to hedge oneself against an adverse move in the Forex market. But what would be the case, let's say, where the customer has agreed with the bank on a 1-year forward rate, let's say it is euro against dollar, and the euro strengthens during that period. So if the customer had not hedged and was to go into the spot market in, say, 1 year's time, it would get a better exchange rate than the rate that it had agreed to when it agreed to the FX forward. There are ways that can be addressed. It can be possible to get a little bit of the benefit of an upward move while at the same time protecting yourself on the downside. So I'm going to discuss what's known as a tracker forward. Now, this is a structured forward product, unlike the, say, vanilla forwards that we've discussed so far. So the tracker forward provides a protected rate to essentially protect the downside, but also the ability to benefit from a favorable exchange rate movement. Let's say we have a German-based company that has agreed to pay a supplier $1 million in 6 months. The company would like to benefit from any favorable exchange rate move in Euro USD, but does not want to pay a premium for this. So in the market, some banks will offer products like this. You could do that by, in this case, using this tracker forward. Now, let's supposing in the example, the vanilla forward rate for 6 months is 1.15. Now, in the example, which I'm going to show on the next couple of screens, the forward provides protection for the customer to buy USD at a worst case rate, the protected rate, let's say of 1.08. However, the customer also has the opportunity to buy USD from the bank at maturity at the prevailing market rate, less, let's say, 4 cents. Now, of course, the 4 cents is just a number I put in there. It could be higher or lower. It could be subject to negotiation, maybe, and it would in some ways depend on market conditions like the volatility of the exchange rate at the time when this tracker forward is negotiated. So let's have a look at the different scenarios. So under scenario 1, the Euro USD strengthens, and at maturity, let's say the exchange rate is now 1.30. The customer then would be able to deal at 1.26. The spot rate at maturity of 1.30 minus the 4 cents, which I mentioned on the previous screen. Now, under scenario 2, the euro weakens against the dollar, and at maturity, let's say the exchange rate is 1.09. Now, under this structured product, the customer must deal at the protected rate of 1.08. That is the obligation. Let's look at a third scenario, and this is where the euro again weakens against the dollar, and this time more seriously, and let's say at maturity the exchange rate is 1.03. Now the protected rate kicks in because the customer can deal at the 1.08, which was the protected rate, which is more favorable, of course, than having to buy at 1.03 in the spot market. Those scenarios can be seen on the screen. So here, for example, is the $1.15. That's the vanilla forward rate, as it were. Now we can see here, in this case, the euro is strengthening, and let's say it does reach 1.30. The customer could then deal at 1.26, as we have discussed. Now, the other scenarios are the euro weakens. In this case, it weakens only to 1.09, but the customer must then deal at 1.08. In the other scenario, which I had on the last screen, the euro weakens all the way down to 1.03, but in this case, the customer is protected again at the 1.08 level. Finally, what I'd like to discuss is another example. This time we're switching to dollar yen, and I want to show how the pricing would work on, in this case, a 90-day forward involving the US dollar against the Japanese yen. First thing to notice here, by the way, is that unlike, say, GBP USD or Euro USD, in this case, the dollar is the base currency. It's the first quoted currency, and the Japanese yen is the quote currency. And I'm using a rate of exchange, which is $1 would be worth, or be able to buy 150 Japanese yen. So there we can see the spot rate. We need, as I have explained earlier on, we need to plug in two applicable interest rates, in this case for 90 days. And I'm going to use the 3-month SOFR rate at, say, 3.7. And for the Japanese currency, we're going to use the 3-month TONA rate, which is the equivalent really, and that is, at the time of recording, around 75 basis points. Now, the way this could be calculated is, as I have indicated earlier, we can either use continuous compounding, and in that case, we would find that the forward rate is 148.91, or if we were to use the simpler method, the simple compounding approach that I illustrated earlier, we would find that the 1-year forward rate is at 148.94. Well, I hope very much that you found that video to be of interest and valuable. And could I suggest that you subscribe to my channel, the Corcoran Codex, where the theme is analyzing critical ideas and episodes in the world of global finance. If you do subscribe, then you will be notified as to when I add new material to the channel, which I do on a regular basis. Thank you very much for watching.